What's up guys, welcome back to Core CSS Mastery. We're going to be talking about backgrounds. Now we have been making use of some very basic backgrounds by using the background color property. For example, on our blank HTML page, if we style background color, set the value to gray and refresh the page, now we have a gray background on our page. In this case, it applies to the entire page because we've styled the body element directly, but we can also add backgrounds to containers and all kinds of elements, which naturally might not take up the entire viewport. But there is more than just setting the color that's available as background options. We have a range of different properties that we can configure. For example, we could also set an image as the background, and we can do that with the background image property. Now, if we just browse the current directory, you'll see that we have tree.png available. So we're going to use the URL method and we'll pass tree.png as the parameter. Let's save that and refresh the page. Now, as you can guess, this is supposed to be a tree, but part of the issue we have here is that the tree is so large, we're only actually getting part of the tree, the top left corner of it. So this is where background size is going to come in handy. So let's set a background size property. Now, there are a few ways that we can manipulate the size of the background. One simple way is simply to pass values in pixels. For example, if I set one value 100 pixels, the width and the height of this background image is 100 pixels. Now we can actually pass two values here. So if I pass 100 pixels and 200 pixels, let's see what happens here. So you can see the image is now 200 pixels tall, but 100 pixels wide. So if we pass one value, it's going to apply to both the height and the width of the element or the background. If we pass two values, we can see that first value applies to the width, whereas the second value applies to the height of the element. Now notice at the moment that that tree is automatically repeating. We've now set it to a size where it's small enough that many of those images can load up as part of the background. Now this is great if we want that type of effect, but we might not want an image to repeat. For example, we could just want it to appear once, and this is where background repeat comes into play. So we'll set a background repeat property, and if we want to disable the repeat entirely, we can use the no repeat value. Let's have a look what happens. So we just have one instance of our image, which by default is in the top left of the document. Another thing we can do is specify repeat, but specify that it should only repeat on the X or Y axis. So if we set background repeat X, the image is going to repeat horizontally, but it won't repeat vertically. And we can do the same for repeat Y. You can see the image repeats vertically, but not horizontally. Now, another option for background size, aside from the fact that we can also pass percentages values, there's a range of different sizing values we can use here. We can also use the value contain. Now, the way this is supposed to work is that it's going to cause the image to load up fully, but take the maximum amount of space while still retaining its aspect ratio. Now, we can see at the moment, it's actually the opposite. It seems as if the background image is as small as it can possibly be, and that's because we haven't set a height on the body element. So if we set a height to 110 VH, so just slightly larger than the viewport height, the browser is going to attempt to load up the image once full size. Now we can see that's more or less what's happening, but we do still have a little bit of a second tree loading up over on the right hand side. So what's happening here is the element has loaded up as big as possible while still maintaining its aspect ratio, but due to that aspect ratio relative to the size of the viewport, the container is actually slightly larger than the image itself, which is leaving room for the image to start repeating. So contain is almost working here, but not quite. Having said this, we already know how to fix this problem because we can just set background repeat, no repeat, and we're going to get one image load up. Now you can probably see that one of the downsides to this image is not strictly centered. It appears to be slightly more over to the left-hand side of the page, and that's where the background position property comes in. So let's set background position center. Let's see what happens to our image. So you can see it moves slightly, so it's now in the center. Now to give this a more visible effect, let's reduce the size of the image to 250 pixels. And we can see it's now loading in the center of the page. Of course, the size of the body is just over the available viewport height. So we do actually have a scroll bar at the side. And we can see the image moves up and down. So let's reduce that effect temporarily. Let's set the VH to 100. And let's reduce it slightly so we don't have any scroll bar. Let's set it to 95 VH. And you can see the scroll bar disappears and we have a centered background image. We can use different values for background position. So for example, what happens if we set bottom and refresh? Image jumps to the bottom. Fairly self-explanatory. If we set top, it's going to be at the top but centered. We can also provide two values. For example, top right. You probably guessed where the image was going to appear. It's now at the top right. Let's try bottom left. Now this works as well even with repeat set. So we might think, well, how exactly does that work? At the moment, the image is starting from the left. If we use center for the background position, you can see that at the left of the page, we actually have the image being cut off halfway through because the image starts at the center of the page. If we set background position right, we're going to see our first full tree to the far right of the viewport. And there's some cropping over on the left-hand side of the page. So you can see it's not a case of only being able to use background position or background repeat. We can actually make use of both of them. Let's get rid of the repeat for now. We're not just limited to 9 locations on the screen. There are other values that can be passed to background position. For example, let's see what happens if we use the value 50%. See, it appears in the middle of the page. What if we use 2% values, 55 and 25%? Well, we can see it's 50% from the left margin, but 25% from the top margin. So if we say 50, 75, it's now appearing 75% from the top, but 50% from the left. So you can see we have fairly precise control over where this background image loads. Let's get rid of our background position and let's set the VH on the body to something that's large enough where it's going to force a scroll bar. So you can see at the moment we scroll and we actually leave our background image behind. So as we scroll down, we can see eventually we don't have a background image anymore. Let's set that to the center of the page. So we'll say background position, center. You can see at the moment it's in the center of the entire page. So when we have the scroll bar all of the way up, the tree actually appears to the bottom of the viewport. Whereas once we've scrolled all the way down, the tree appears to the top of the viewport. Now this is because by default, this background has a background attachment property of scroll. So if I add that property and value to the CSS, we won't see any change in the page because this is how the page behaves by default. As we scroll, the background image moves along with the scroll. It's not fixed to the viewport, but we can fix it to the viewport. So we can set background attachment fixed. If we refresh the page, we can now see the tree appears in the center of the viewport. This is despite the fact that our scroll bar is all the way to the bottom. As we scroll up, you can see that that background image stays in its exact location, no matter the position of the scroll bar. We might be able to see the effect of this even better if we add a really long paragraph to the body. Let's refresh this and let's increase the font size on that paragraph. So let's set font size to 30 pixels. So it'll be fairly large text. And what you can see as we scroll, the text moves, but the position of the tree stays the same. It's a really simple thing to think about. Do you want your background to move when the user scrolls, or do you want your background to be constant no matter where the user scrolls to on the page? Now, if we delete our text in the paragraph, there's one additional method of creating nice backgrounds that I would like to discuss that doesn't involve using an image. And we can make use of the shorthand background property for this. So let's just refresh our page. You can see we have a completely empty page. Let's set a background property. So this is shorthand. We can actually specify a number of the background properties using this shorthand background property. We're going to make use of the linear gradient function in CSS. And the best way of explaining what this does is just to see it in action. So we'll set linear gradient, and the parameters we're going to pass to this are a direction. So let's say to bottom. Now, As it happens, this is the default option, but we're going to include this just so you can see how this works. And we're going to pick 2 colors. So let's pick color 1, red, and let's pick color 2, yellow. And you can experiment with whichever colors you want for this. So we have linear gradient, 2 bottom, red, yellow. Let's refresh. Now this looks very strange at the moment, and as we've already seen, it's because we need to set a height on the body. So this is not the intended effect at this stage. Let's set height to 95 VH because that's just about enough to get rid of the scroll bar. And we might also want to set a background repeat, no repeat, or another thing we could do is just increase the VH value there. In fact, that's probably the best thing to do because we don't want that white area at the bottom. Let's set this to 100 VH and see if that achieves the effect we want. So what's happening here? We can see that we've created a color gradient or a linear gradient. We start off with one color and we gradually merge into a second color. And we can create some really nice background effects with this. Now, I think the vivid red and vivid yellow might be a bit too much, but you can obviously choose some more subtle colors for this. We can also change the direction. So if I say, for example, to right, let's refresh. You can see we start with red on the left and we move over to yellow on the right. Now let's see if we can find something that's a little bit less garish. See what happens if we have an aqua to light green, for example. Never tried this before. Now we can use any color value for this. So that means we could also use colors with a limited alpha channel so they become transparent, for example, to create more subtle background effects. Another thing we can actually do is provide more than one color. So you actually end up going from one color to the next to the next. So you can see we've gone from aqua to purple to light green. As you can imagine, there are so many different combinations you could make use of here, an infinite number, in fact. So it's possible to create some really cool background effects for our page or for our element. All right, so key takeaways from this lesson: how to load up a background image, along with the various ways that we can style that image so we can have it repeating or just one version of the image in the center. And also we've seen how we can set a background image using the CSS linear gradient function to create these really cool color effects. Thanks very much for watching. Catch you in the next part of the series.